Hi, my name's Talay. Thank you for the lovely introduction, Ben. Yes, I do have a lifelong passion for insects and particularly beetles. So my talk today is called Action for Insects, and we're going to be talking about what have insects ever done for us, okay? So if you're not convinced that insects are useful or important in any way, by the end of this talk, hopefully we'll have at least some of you convinced of their importance. So let's get started. So we've got some fun facts to begin with. So approximately 59% of the world's living organisms are insects. So nearly 1 million insect species are actually known to science. There actually should be a pie chart there, which isn't appearing. That's fine. There's nearly 1 million insect species known to science. So insects are really, really important. So over half of the world's organisms are insects. So the largest proportion of this are beetles. We then have the flies, which make up 9%. We then have the wasps and the moths and the butterflies, and then the rest of the other insects are 13%. So compared to vertebrates, which we are less than 1% of the world's organisms. So it just goes to show how numerous and important insects are. And people are discovering new species of insects every day. So they're really, really important. Unfortunately, we don't have my pie chart, but that's fine. So what actually is an insect? So insects have no internal skeleton. Instead, they have an exoskeleton, so it's a tough outer coat covering each body segment. So they have 3 body regions, the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. And they have 3 pairs of legs, so 6 legs on an insect, a pair of antennae, and a set of wings. So that's really important in how an insect is defined. Okay, so who needs insects? So insects are really, really important. Most people know that insects can be brilliant pollinators, so bees, but it's not just bees. There's loads of other different types of pollinators as well, along with our beetles, our flies, our butterflies as well, all brilliant pollinators. But they also are decomposers, so they could decompose carrion, wood, and dung. So they're really, really important. Otherwise, we'd be surrounded by lots of things that no one likes. They're also brilliant biological control agents. So instead of using nasty pesticides, insects are so useful in controlling pests. So a common example that people know of generally is ladybirds against aphids, but there's loads of other different types of biological control agents, such as parasitoid wasps, which are really, really useful in controlling our pests that we don't like in our gardens, as well as on a commercial scale in larger agricultural settings. So insects are actually valued at $57 billion worldwide, which is quite astounding. So it just goes to show just how important they really are. And you can see from this diagram, we've got insects at the bottom and then all these different ecosystem services that our insects can provide for us, not only in our gardens, but globally, commercially, agricultural scales. So they're really, really, really useful. So how are our insects doing? Well, unfortunately, as goes for a lot of organisms at the moment, they are undergoing steep declines in population, and that is for many different reasons. So a large proportion of this is to do with loss of habitat and increased pesticide use, which are really, really damaging our insect populations. So in the UK, actually 60% of our insect populations have been wiped out since 2003, which is only in 20 years. So it's quite incredible that kind of steep decline can happen so quickly. So as you can see from the graph here, these goes for lots of different groups of insects. So these are just pollinating insects. And you can see the bees, the hoverflies, wild bees as well are really, really suffering in this country. But there's lots of things we can do. So do not despair. So for our next part, we're going to get to know our local insects, okay? So there's a little bit of participation if anybody wants to get involved in the next section. We are going to be covering each kind of major order of insects. So our first order is our local beetles. So beetles are the largest order of insects. Actually, 1 in 4 of every single living organism on our planet is a beetle. So if you were to line up a single known species of every living organism, plants and animals, 1 in 5 of those, or 1 in 4, would be a beetle. So they're very, very numerous. And in this country, there's over 4,000 species. So you'll never get bored looking at beetles. And that's why I love beetles so much. So their wing cases fold in a T shape, and that's a really, really nice way to differentiate them from other orders of insects. And they also have biting mouth parts. So a lot of beetles are predatory. So they're really, really good at controlling pests as well. So now we get on to our first game. If anybody wants to get involved, please put up their hand. We're going to play Beetle Bingo. So if you know what this is, please raise your hand. Does anybody know what this one is? Yes, it is indeed a stag beetle. So our stag beetle is one of the most iconic species in the UK. It's our largest beetle. They're really, really important, but they're undergoing a massive decline because their larvae live for up to 7 years in rotting wood. And that's a habitat that's steeply declining. People clear away dead tree stumps and don't leave logs lying around anymore. They want to clear it up. And that's actually a really, really important habitat for these beetles. So yeah, undergoing steep declines. Okay, the next one. Anybody know what this is? Yeah, nice. Yeah, a sexton beetle, yeah, or a carrion beetle. So these are awesome. These are really, really important in clearing up dead animals, basically. And they have a really, really interesting life cycle. So the male will bring dead gifts for the female, and they present them with maybe a dead mouse, and the female and the male together will help to bury it. And then the female will lay her eggs on it. And when the larvae hatch, they will eat the dead mouse, for example. But what's really interesting about sexton beetles is that they are one of the few beetles that actually exhibit biparental care. So both the male and the female will help to look after the larvae and nurture them into adulthood. And but what's really fun and quite gruesome is the larvae will beg for food. But if the larvae begs too much, the female will eat them, which is really quite fun. It's supposed to be quite a good way to that they don't basically eat all the resources in one go. So it's kind of a way of maintaining that all of the larvae get all the right amount of food that they require. So yeah, no greedy larvae there. Our next one, does anybody know what this one is? Another nice one you might find in woodland, overturning logs sometimes. Does anyone? Yeah, a violet ground beetle. So this is Carabus violaceus. It's a really, really good beetle to have in your gardens because they like to eat slugs and snails. So they're really, really useful at controlling pests. They are predatory. These actually have fused wing cases. So they don't fly, they just crawl around. So you might find them if you're turning over logs. And they're really, really beautiful, quite big, charismatic beetles. So yeah, really lovely. So that is our violet ground beetle. And then, anybody know this one? Yeah. Yeah, this is our ladybird. So lots of people don't realize ladybirds are actually beetles, and they're obviously really, really important for pest control in our gardens. The larvae and the adult are really, really good predators of aphids, and they're quite voracious predators. So very, very useful to have. And then this one is a less common one, but it's around at this time of year. You often see it on things like cow parsley in kind of meadows. Yeah. Yeah, it is a soldier beetle. These are really lovely. Yeah, you'll find them. They eat pollen in meadows and things like that at this time of year. And then our last beetle for the day. I mean, there's loads of beetles. I could go on forever about beetles, but this is my final one. Does anybody know what this is? It is a dung beetle. Dung beetles are brilliant. They roll, well, there are 3 types of dung beetle in the world. There are rollers, which are the iconic ones that roll the ball of dung. We have our tunnelers, which tunnel underneath the dung and they take a ball of dung with them. And then there's our dwellers, which live their entire life cycle in dung. In this country, however, we only have the tunnelers and the dwellers. We don't have any rollers that roll the dung. But this is a geotrupid. So these are the tunnelers. They live underneath the dung, but you quite often see them in woodlands just wandering around the paths. So be careful that you don't squish them because they do like to walk along paths. And they're rather lovely. So yeah, these are our beetles. Okay, so for our next group of insects, these are our bugs. And we use the word bugs to describe insects all the time, but actually true bugs are an entire order unto themselves. So these are hemipterans, and there are 1,700 species of bugs in the UK. And their wing cases, unlike beetles, which fold in a T, they fold in either an X or a Y shape. And they have tube-like mouth parts. So they will either be predatory and kind of inject their mouth parts into their prey and then suck up the insides, or they'll inject them into a tree, for example, or a tree stem. So aphids are an example of that. So does anybody know what this one is? They like to jump, so the clue's in the name. Go on. Yeah, this is a frog hopper. So these are really cool. They, if you kind of tap them, they will jump. And the larvae, you may have seen something that looks a bit like spit surrounding a stem in your garden, maybe. This is called cuckoo spit. And cuckoo spit contains the immature life stages of these frog hoppers. And they live inside the cuckoo spit to protect them from predators because they're really soft-bodied at that point. Okay, so our next one. This is a really, really beautiful one that you see sometimes. Any ideas? No worries if not. So this is our seed bug. So seed bugs, they have the, they quite often are predatory, and these are called firebugs because of this beautiful red color here. And then our last one, we sometimes call them stink bugs. That's because they produce a nasty liquid that smells really gross. Anybody know? Yeah, a shield bug. So our shield bugs, there's a few different types of bugs. Quite often you'll see them at this time of year in their juvenile stages. You actually can't identify any bugs from their juvenile stages very well. So you have to wait until they're fully grown to be able to identify them. But yes, this is our shield bug. So next of all, we have our flies. So there's a massive 7,000 species of flies that have been recorded in the UK. And crucially with flies, which differentiates them from bees and wasps, they have one pair of wings. So they only have two wings. And all flies eat their food by in liquid form. So they then suck it up using their long mouth parts. And flies are actually a really, really brilliant group of pollinators. So lots of people don't realize that about flies. They're also great at decomposition as well, fly larvae. So yeah, this is our first fly. Does anybody know what this is? Yeah. Yeah, this is our scorpion fly. So scorpion flies are completely harmless. They have this kind of stinger, which they use for competition. It's completely harmless. But yes, this is the scorpion fly. And then we have, this is a lovely little pollinator. It's a very, yes, it is a hoverfly. So hoverflies are really, really great pollinators. Quite often they all mimic bees or wasps, because obviously bees and wasps have a stinger, but these guys are completely harmless, but they get mistaken for bees and wasps all the time. And they're really, really useful in your gardens. And then our last one might be the cutest fly. Yeah, it's a bee fly. Bee flies are really, really lovely. They look really cute, but actually as a larvae, they're pretty gruesome. So the adults will flick their eggs nearby solitary bee nests. And then the larvae, when they hatch, are parasitoids of solitary bees, which means that they will eat the bee larvae while the bee larvae is still developing, which is pretty horrible, but they're really cute. So that's our bee flies. Okay, so our next group are the bees, wasps, and ants, and they're all grouped into one group called Hymenoptera, and they all belong to the same order. Yep, Hymenoptera, and there are over 7,000 UK species. So ants are actually the most abundant organisms on Earth. If you've ever seen a huge ant nest, you can see how that might be the case. Loads of them. So they have two pairs of wings, which differentiates them from the flies. So they have 4 wings in total. And so, yeah, let's start our bingo. Right. Anybody know what these are? Yeah, these are ants. Yes, these are when they become their flying ant stage. This often happens when it's a bit stormy weather. And they develop wings and they can then fly to develop new nest sites. So that's why when they'll have their wings. So these are the black garden ants. And then this one it kind of gives it away from what it's eating. But a lot of wasps are predatory generally, but this is a parasitoid wasp. So parasitic wasps are really great at controlling pests in your garden. They've also got quite a gruesome life cycle. They will sting their food or their host, which paralyzes them, but they're still alive. They then drag it back to their burrow where they lay eggs on it, and then the eggs hatch and they eat the food source from the inside out, while the food source is still alive. So that's lovely. But yeah, really, really useful to have in your gardens. And there's lots of specific ones to different hosts. So quite often there'll be specific ones for aphids, which makes them really useful to have in agricultural environments as well. And then this is a really lovely bee. Does anybody know this one? Yeah? Yeah, it is. It's our hairy-footed flower bee. They're lovely. They're really, really fluffy. And then for our last one, it's quite an iconic one. People will have this a lot in their gardens. It's the last one, so it's got to be the garden bumblebee. Yes, and really, really brilliant pollinators, obviously, but everyone knows that bees are great pollinators. Okay, and then our last group, I'm pretty sure, for the day, is our butterflies and moths. So there's only 60 species of butterflies in the UK, but there's over 2,500 species of moths. So I'd say if you're going to start with any group of insects, if you really want to get your eye in for species, butterflies are a really, really good start because they're very iconic and easy to identify. So a little myth buster for the day, only 2 species of moths actually eat your clothes. So people hate moths, they have a vendetta against moths, but you shouldn't because they're lovely. And some of them are really great pollinators as well. And actually only 2 species will eat your clothes. So show you the moths some love. So let's start with our moth and butterfly bingo. Anybody know this one? Yes. It is a peacock butterfly. These have got these beautiful eye spots, which make them look more scary than they actually are to predators. Yes, indeed, our peacock butterfly. This one is really nice if you can spot one of these. Yeah. Yeah, this is our hummingbird hawk moth. They fly just like hummingbirds. They fly and their wings go really, really fast. And they're quite loud if you hear them flying past you. But they kind of flutter in front of a flower. This is what is this? This is Buddleia, yes. And they've got a really, really long tongue, or proboscis, which they use to get the nectar inside the flowers. Okay. And then we've got this one. Yes, it is a tiger moth. So actually telling the difference between butterflies and moths can be tricky because there isn't a set definition. But one of the ways you can tell is the way they land. So when butterflies land, they tend to land with their wings closed, but moths tend to land with their wings open. But other than that, it's actually really difficult to tell them apart because lots of people would say, well, moths come out at night, they're nocturnal. That's not always the case. So this is actually a day flying moth. So just to confuse things, these, Jersey tiger moths are day flying moths, and they have a stronghold in London. So you may see them around these areas. Okay, and then I think this is our last one. Orange tip, yeah, absolutely. And yeah, lots of really iconic and easy to identify butterflies, which are nice. Okay, so now on to possibly the most important part. Want to help your local insects. I'm presuming you all do, that's why you're all here. So it's really, really important that we can help insects as much as possible, and it's really easy to do. So you probably all heard that you can make a log pile. So just by laying some logs on top of each other, partially burying them at the base is a really good idea for things like stag beetle larvae, because they like it to be slightly rotting. And you'll start to see, as the logs stay there for a while, some holes in the logs, and those will be from longhorn beetles. So the larvae tend to live their whole life in dead wood. So there's lots of dead wood specialists that would love this sort of environment. And you can fill any gaps with dry leaves. That would just help to keep things like rats out that would try and eat all the insects. But yeah, really great for lots of different insects, a log pile. Then you can make a stumpery. You can just flip the logs around and place them in the ground like that. Again, burying some at the bottom is really helpful for those species that like to live underground. And then compacting the soil around the logs so they remain stable. And then making a leaf pile. Like, this sounds so simple, but just leaving some leaves around in a pile is really, really great. So it's a great habitat for loads of different creepy crawlies. So spiders, worms, beetles, centipedes, earwigs, is really, really helpful to maintain that kind of ecosystem of all the useful insects and bugs that you might want in your garden. But if you don't want to leave your leaves around, you can do something like a compost heap. So composting is really, really great way to keep leaving a dedicated space for composting your green waste and your kitchen waste, but not cooked foods. Choosing a wooden construction is so much better than a plastic one, because leaving the slats makes it breathable. It means that the larvae, when they hatch out, can get out, and then they will come back and lay their eggs in there again. So it's a really, really important to have a wooden one if you are going to have a compost bin. And alongside that, dead hedging is another really good way that you can encourage insects as well. Just placing logs on top of each other, twigs and things like that in a kind of hedge is another good way as well. And then you can dedicate your planting. So choosing native wildflower plants in this room, there's loads of beautiful ones around us that you can, that are really, really great to have in your gardens. Choosing native wildflowers and open flowers. So that means that instead of having really, really fussy flowers in the same way of simple flowers. So something like a dahlia, for example, that has loads and loads of petals, actually uses up all the energy into making petals, as opposed to making anything nice, such as nectar for the insects. So those sorts of plants, lots of ornamentals, actually don't encourage insects at all. They might look beautiful, but they've lost all of their nectar, basically, because they put in all the energy into making lots of petals instead. So having simple open flowers are really, really nice way to attract pollinators into your garden. And then leaving dead heading for as long as possible. I know sometimes people don't like the look of it, but they're really, really great for insects to hibernate in. They're slightly warmer than other spots in your garden, so they're a really nice kind of heat trap for insects to rest in. And obviously then don't mow. Leaving a patch of grass to go wild as much as possible is a brilliant way to encourage pollinators into your garden. So I think that's everything. So thank you for listening and helping our insects. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, I'm very happy to answer those. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Talay. That was so interesting. We are just going to take some questions now, and questions online as well. So if you do have any questions, if you just want to put your hand up, I will bring the mic over to you if you just want to hold it close to your mouth, and then Talay will answer it. Great. Yes.
Hi, I just wonder, you said something rather staggering about beetles,
Yes.
the amount of proportion of species on Earth that were beetles,
Yes.
as compared to humans.
Yes.
Can you say it again?
Yes. So 59% of creatures in the world are insects, and 1 in 5 of every known living organism is a beetle. So yeah, if you were to line up a single known organism of every different organism that we know of, 1 in 5 would be a beetle.
I'll try not to tread on that.
Thank you. Any other questions in person or online? Yeah, I'll bring the mic over to you now. Thank you.
I've planted runner beans.
Oh yeah.
But they're not turning into beans. The flowers are there, but I just don't see the insects. And what do I do about it?
Yeah. So I guess you can do things like complementary planting. So planting wildflower strips alongside your beans would encourage natural pollinators and also the predators of the pests at the same time. So complementary planting of wildflowers, such as, I mean, anything really, would help to encourage those pollinators in the first place. That might be a good way of doing that. But yeah, unfortunately, they are fewer insects around generally. Anyways, yeah.
Thank you. Okay.
Hiya. What can you do in your own garden to sort of avoid a monoculture of certain plants?
I guess a nice way would be to get kind of a wildflower seed mix. You can get kind of like things like seed bombs, which are always fun, and just creating the diversity, but the right diversity. So like useful flowers such as the simple flowers, so lots of wildflowers, things like lavender is really great, lots of herbs as well. If you want to make the plants useful in your garden, then they're really great for insects as well. But generally, yeah, I guess just trying to bring in as many native wildflowers as possible. You can get seeds quite from lots of different places. There's places like Heritage Seeds, I think they're called, and they do lots of amazing wildflowers that are kind of people don't tend to plant anymore or don't have in their gardens as much. And they have loads of different native wildflower seeds that you can get from them. So yeah, places like that.
Thank you very much.
So I have a little gravel garden behind my house, and it's mostly gravel and paving. But I'd really like to put up some more insect-friendly features. So I was thinking about putting up a bee hotel.
Nice.
I've just got some questions about, how you keep them best for insects, whether you have to clean them out at all, because sometimes the cells aren't successful, are they?
Yeah.
When's the best time to do that? Because I always feel like, is it in use? Is this going to hatch out? And,
Yeah.
What other things could I do in a little gravel garden, aside from the lovely things that you've suggested?
Yeah.
Kind of encourage invertebrates.
So I would need to look at exactly what time of year is best to clean them out, but you're right, you should clean out the cells at least once a year when they're finished, because solitary bees won't use them again, and it can cause like a buildup of fungi and lots of nasty things that the bees won't like, so they won't use those again if they're not clear. But I'm not sure exactly when, so I'd need to look into that. But another really nice way is making like a really simple pond, even if it's just like a bucket of water, but making sure that there's a nice way in and a way out. So layering it up with stones inside there and a way out on the other side, so that you can encourage insects in that way. Another way, so on my garden, actually, we don't have any lawn at all. So we've done pots, loads of pots, so many pots, and planted in plants that way. It does mean that sometimes they don't always do as well as they would in obviously a nice drained soil, but we have had so many pollinators this year, like so many butterflies. It's been amazing. So there are lots of ways that you can do it just like that. But yeah, bee hotels, if you can, also making like rockeries and things around your plants gives a really nice place for hiding spots for predatory beetles that they can hide in and get your slugs and snails when they turn up, which they will. Yeah, things like that, if that helps, but no worries.
Okay, thank you. I think we've got a question online.
Yeah, sure.
So we have the question, I want to know more about the 2 species of moth that eat clothing so I can identify them.
Oh, okay. They are micro moths. They're really tiny. I can't remember the Latin off the top of my head. They don't have common names, I don't think. And they're small and brown and quite inconspicuous. So it's a little bit tricky to identify, but you will know if you have them because they'll start to be little holes in your clothes, and the larvae tend to live in carpets. So you will see the larvae and your carpet starting to go threadbare. So you will know if you have them, but being able to identify them exactly, I wouldn't be able to tell you that because they're really difficult to identify, but I hope that's a little bit helpful.
Yeah, thank you very much, was.